Today, we're diving into a story from India's struggle for independence that really makes you question what it means for a revolution to succeed or to fail. This is the story of the Ghadar uprising.
So let's just start with this question right here. What if a rebellion that was, by all counts, completely crushed on the battlefield was actually a huge victory in the long run? That's the paradox we're looking at today, and it's a story that kind of messes with our whole definition of success.
All right, so first, let's talk about the plan. And wow, was it a big one? It was bold, it seemed straightforward, and it was all kicked into high gear by the start of the First World War. For these revolutionaries, the Ghadarites, who were living abroad, this felt like the perfect moment to strike. So the idea was basically this. Thousands of Indian immigrants living overseas would pack their bags and head back home, mostly to Punjab. Their one big mission, link up with soldiers in the British Indian Army, convince them to mutiny, and light the spark that would set off a massive nationwide rebellion. The goal, to finally kick the British out and set up a free Indian republic. You have to admit, it was a grand vision, cooked up with a lot of passion from thousands of miles away.
But, and this is a big but, that grand plan started to fall apart almost the second it hit the ground in India. So let's take a look at how it all just unraveled. Well, for starters, the British government was way ahead of them. They knew the Ghadarites were coming. So as these thousands of revolutionaries landed, the authorities were just waiting for them. The ones they considered most dangerous were arrested on the spot. Others were basically put under house arrest in their own villages. The first few attempts to start mutinies just fizzled out. There was no real organization. And even when a famous revolutionary like Rush Bihari Bose showed up to try and pull things together, it was too late. British intelligence was all over the movement. They had spies inside, and just as a final date for the uprising was set, boom, mass arrests completely took the head off the movement before a single shot was fired. And here's maybe the most critical part. The Ghadarites got the mood back home completely wrong. They were expecting to be greeted as heroes, to find a population just waiting for a revolution. Instead, they found that most people in Punjab just weren't interested in what they called a romantic adventure. In fact, some major community groups actually called them criminals and helped the government hunt them down. Ouch. The immediate price of this failure was just brutal. In the trials that came after, 45 of these revolutionaries were sentenced to death. 45. Think about that. An entire group of passionate leaders just gone.
And it didn't stop there. On top of the executions, more than 200 others were handed these incredibly long prison sentences. They were basically locked away and silenced for decades. When you put it all together, an entire generation of revolutionary leadership was just wiped out. So yeah, you're looking at it from a military or an organizational point of view. There's really no other way to say it. The Ghadar movement was completely and totally crushed. The rebellion was over before it even had a chance to start. But hang on a second. Is that really the end of the story? Does winning the battle, achieving that one specific goal, does that mean that's the only way to measure success? Because this is where the story gets really interesting. If we stop looking at the failed rebellion and instead look at the ideas behind it, a totally different picture emerges. This is where the Ghadar movement had its biggest and its most important victory. I mean, let's redefine what success even means here. What if it's not about winning a war, but about changing how a nation thinks about itself, about planting the seeds of new ideas like secularism and democracy? If you look at it that way, well, then the Ghadarites were incredibly successful. You see, the Ghadarites were masters of propaganda. Their newspaper, the Ghadar, was huge, and it spread their core beliefs to Indians all over the world. And what were those beliefs? A powerful vision of a secular, democratic, and equal India. An India where being Indian was more important than where you were from, and one that looked at the world with an international perspective. And this wasn't just talk. You can see it in what they actually did. They worked hard to build this new kind of identity. They told their followers, you're not a Punjabi first or a Sikh first, you are an Indian first. They started using the nationalist salute Bande Mataram instead of traditional religious greetings. And get this, instead of being proud of the so-called martial traditions of Sikhs in the British Army, they said it was a source of shame. They told those soldiers to rise up and fight for their own country, not for their colonizers. And honestly, nothing sums it all up better than this quote from one of their leaders, Sohan Singh Bhakna. We were not Sikhs or Punjabis. Our religion was patriotism. That right there was the radical new idea they were fighting for.
So now we have these two completely different stories, right? On one hand, a total disaster. On the other, this huge ideological success. So how do we make sense of that? Let's look at the movement's fatal flaws and its absolutely incredible legacy. The military failure wasn't just bad luck. The Ghadarites were running more on passion than on solid planning. They seriously underestimated just how powerful the British were. They didn't really have a central leadership or a clear organizational plan. And like we said, they just completely misread the room when it came to whether people in India were actually ready for a revolt.
So if you want to boil it all down, this chart says it all. If you judge them on their stated goal, kicking the British out by force, it was a total failure, no question. But if you judge them on their lasting impact, shaping a new kind of secular, democratic, and national identity for generations to come, well, then it was a profound success. But we can't ignore the tragedy of it all. The cost of that failure was immense. An entire generation of secular nationalist leaders in Punjab was lost. And you have to wonder, what if they had been around in the decades that followed? How might things have been different? It's a huge what if of history. And that brings us right back to our big question. How do we actually measure whether a movement like this was successful or not?
Because this story didn't end in 1915. Not by a long shot. The Ghadar ideology didn't die in those prisons or on the gallows. The people who survived, who were filled with these ideas of a secular and equal society, they went on to become the founders of all sorts of peasant and workers' movements in Punjab for years to come. The ideas lived on. They found a new home.
So I'll leave you with the same question we started with. Does success mean one big, flashy victory, or is it something quieter, something measured in the slow, patient work of changing hearts and minds, an influence that echoes for generations? What do you think really makes a movement successful?